Hey guys, tonight we're going to peel back the layers, quite literally, on a very strange chapter in the history of sleep. Picture this, the year is 1874. You're lying wide awake in a creaky bed, gaslight flickering above you, shadows of lace curtains stretching across the walls like ghostly fingers. The streets outside are quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a passing carriage or the far-off bark of a stray dog. You've tried warm milk. You've said your prayers. But your eyelids just won't give in. And so, like many of your Victorian neighbors, you reach beneath your bed and pull out a raw onion. Yes. A raw, slightly squishy, and not at all pleasant-smelling onion. And that, dear listener, is where tonight's story begins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where, and when, you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the velvety quiet of your candlelit bedroom. The bed is dressed in stiff white linen, and there's a bowl of cooling onion slices perched precariously on your bedside table. They glisten and the flames flicker, giving off a sharp, earthy scent that's already making your eyes sting. Welcome to a very real trend from Victorian Britain, onion-based insomnia cures. It's not some oddball fringe habit reserved for eccentrics and hypochondriacs. No, this was mainstream in its own peculiar way. Popular enough that entire booklets were printed listing onion remedies alongside herbal teas and opiate-laced tonics. Some were folk traditions passed down from grandmothers, others, more dangerously, were peddled by self-declared sleep specialists with names like Dr. Tillinghast or Lady Frobisher's Sleep Society. You pace the room, peeling an onion with careful, almost reverent fingers. This one's a yellow onion, nothing fancy, just the common sort grown in Kent and sold in clusters at the market. Victorian housewives believed the sulfur in onion somehow relaxed the body, drew out nervous heat, and replaced it with calm. The logic was fuzzy, but then again, so was most of Victorian medicine. You sit by the fire and cradle a warm compress made from boiled onion skins, folded neatly in linen. You press it to your temples, the slick warmth seeping into your scalp. The pungency assaults your senses, but after weeks of sleepless nights, you've grown weirdly fond of it. There's something almost reassuring about its predictability. Historians still argue whether the trend started in urban centers or rural parishes, whether it was rooted in pagan remedies or borrowed from Ayurvedic traditions via the British Empire's imperial tentacles. Some even claim it sprang up during a post-cholera health panic, when people were desperate for anything that might purify the air, and their nerves. As you lie back against your stiff pillow, you recall stories from your neighbor down the lane, who swears she hasn't had a nightmare since sleeping with half an onion in each sock. She calls it her toe tincture. You didn't ask too many questions. Then there's the widow 2 doors down, who insists she cured her insomnia by placing onion slices on her chest, to pull the heat of thinking out. You tried it once and nearly gave up halfway through from the itch alone. You glance at the clock. It's nearly midnight now, the witching hour when, in your time, people doom-scroll through their phones. But in the Victorian age, they reached for root vegetables. The air thickens with the smell of onion, old floor polish, and something faintly metallic from the fireplace. The moonlight falls in a square on the bed. The outside world has quieted completely now, and it's just you, your onion, and a growing suspicion that perhaps you're being quietly pickled by tradition. You shift under the covers, comforted not by science but by sheer repetition. Victorians often believed that the body obeyed habit more than logic. If you expected the onion to help, it probably would. That's how they rationalized it, anyway. A light breeze tiptoes through the window pane, and your eyelids droop just slightly. The onion is doing its thing, or maybe it isn't, but at least you're not alone. Thousands of others, tucked under thick quilts from Brighton to Yorkshire, are drifting into dreams with onion fumes swirling through their nostrils. And if you should wake up tomorrow with onion stains on your pillow and no memory of falling asleep, well, maybe the Victorians were onto something. You wake to the faintest imprint of onion on your sheets, like a ghost of last night's desperation. The house is still. Somewhere beyond the frosted windows, a milkman is probably rattling bottles down a cobblestone street, but you lie perfectly still, the smell of sleep, or maybe just sulfur, still clinging to the air. You don't remember falling asleep. That in itself is a triumph. Tonight, though, you're back at it. Another long evening lies ahead, and you're already planning your remedy, the infamous onion poultice. You shuffle to the kitchen, where the hearth fire has been rekindled just enough to warm your hands and soften the onions. You peel one carefully, your fingers slick with its juice, and place the chopped pieces into a bit of muslin cloth. Victorian households always had muslin, used for straining jams, swaddling babies, and apparently wrapping food against one's bare skin. You fold the cloth over the onions and tie it with string, then press it flat between the iron grates of the stove. The poultice sizzles faintly, heating just enough to draw out its oils, its so-called healing essence. You place it on your bare chest as instructed in a health pamphlet titled "To Court Sleep in the Weary Age." Victorians swore the warmth combined with the volatile compounds in onions would calm what they called neural excitability. Basically, your nerves had the hiccups, and this was the closest thing they had to a sedative burrito. There's something humbling about lying in bed with your torso gently steaming beneath a pocket of cooked onions. But you do it anyway. Because Lady Spindlethwaite, in her widely circulated sleep journal, claimed she hadn't tossed or turned since first placing an onion poultice beneath her nightgown. Historians still argue whether Lady Spindlethwaite even existed, or whether she was a convenient pseudonym for a bored chemist from Birmingham pushing a line of onion-based remedies. Either way, her methods caught on, especially among those too poor for doctors and too stubborn for laudanum. As the onion cools on your chest, your breath catches in your throat, not from emotion, but from sheer eye-watering pungency. It's like snuggling with a caramelized sock. And yet, there's something ritualistic about it. Like prayer, or brushing your teeth in the dark. You hear the clock chime 10. Still early by Victorian standards, when families often stayed up reading aloud or mending clothes. But insomnia didn't wait for respectable hours. It prowled the edges of consciousness and thrived in moments like this, when you were tired but twitchy, warm but restless, utterly alone and vaguely sweaty. You remember the old nursemaid's rhyme whispered to you once. Onions under breast and brow. Sleep shall find thee anyhow. It sounded less comforting when she said it in the dark with only one candle burning and a taxidermied owl glaring down from the mantel. But still. You shift, careful not to dislodge the poultice, and stare at the water stain on the ceiling that you've mentally shaped into Queen Victoria's profile. She'd disapprove of this undignified routine. Or would she? One letter from the Royal Archives, poorly preserved and likely forged, claims a lady-in-waiting once caught the Queen sneaking a dab of onion oil behind her ears, to suppress unseemly agitation. And yet, no medical textbook of the era officially endorsed onions as a cure. Physicians preferred bleeding, blistering, or dosing with bromide. But in parlors and sculleries across the empire, onions kept being rubbed, roasted, boiled, and bagged, all in the name of sleep. One lesser-known theory suggested that onion fumes overloaded the brain's olfactory center, dulling the senses into submission. Kind of like trying to sleep on a bus next to someone eating pickled eggs. It's not relaxing, but your brain eventually gives up. You lie in that balance between skeptical and hopeful, warm and weird. The poultice has gone cool now, no longer useful. You remove it carefully, place it on the nightstand next to your copy of the Gentleman's Guide to Sleep Tinctures, and roll onto your side. Outside, a cat yowls in the alley. Your eyelids flutter, and somewhere in your sinuses, the faint sting of onion still lingers, like an ex you can't quite forget. But the bed is soft. The darkness is deep. And maybe, just maybe, tonight you'll fall asleep before midnight. Just don't let anyone find out you've been marinating like a pot roast to make it happen. You wake again the next evening with the peculiar realization that your pillow smells faintly of last night's poultice. Not overwhelmingly, just enough to suggest something culinary happened in your dreams. But tonight's remedy is far less cozy. Tonight, you'll be chopping. Victorian insomniacs, ever the pioneers of inconvenient experimentation, believed that slicing onions by candlelight could lull the nervous system into submission. The idea was that the act of cutting, not just the onion itself, had soporific powers. The repetition, the tears, the ritual. So, you take out the chopping board. The kitchen is dim, lit only by a flickering oil lamp and the moon's shy reflection on the windowpane. You peel a yellow onion slowly, watching its skin crinkle like old wallpaper. It feels almost ceremonial. You begin slicing. Thick, deliberate cuts. The scent rises fast and mean. Your eyes water before you've even reached the halfway mark. A tear runs down your cheek, not sorrow, just sulfur. The Victorians considered this a good sign. If it burned, it was working. The theory, such as it was, held that onion fumes traveled up the nasal passages and massaged the brain's sleep centers. One pamphlet, The Domestic Nocturne, Recipes for Rest, included an illustration of a woman standing over a plate of onion slices, eyes clenched shut, with the caption, "Let thy vapors lead thee into slumber." Historians still argue whether this practice had any basis in science or was simply another folk habit gone mainstream. Some scholars suspect it originated from rural kitchens where late-night food preparation overlapped with a need for sleep. Others point to early aromatherapy trends, where any strong smell, onion, vinegar, even burnt toast, was believed to have neurological influence. You continue chopping. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Chop. Slide. Sniffle. Wipe. Repeat. You lose track of time. The act of preparing a thing you won't eat feels oddly spiritual. As though you're sacrificing part of your supper to the god of sleep. The Victorians weren't shy about discomfort. Pain was often interpreted as a sign of healing, or at least penance. So when the onions burn your nostrils and fog your vision, it's considered part of the journey. Sleep, after all, is a kind of surrender, and Victorians weren't great at letting go. You pile the slices onto a chipped porcelain plate and carry it back to your room like an offering. The heat from the fire has warmed the air, but the onion smell overtakes everything. It's not pleasant. It's not elegant. But you're tired, and that's all it needs to be. You set the plate near your bedside, just below your nose but not quite close enough to scorch your dreams. You inhale deeply, the sulfur tickling the back of your throat. Supposedly, the fumes help reduce nocturnal excitability, which sounds like a scandal, but really just means tossing and turning with no clear reason. One fringe theory from the era suggested that onions mimic the effects of chloroform on the nervous system, though notably without knocking you unconscious or requiring a handkerchief soaked in danger. It's a reach, but when your options are onion slicing or another sleepless night, you'll believe anything. The smell begins to coat your thoughts. You lie down, slightly damp from your teary-eyed culinary adventure, and pull the blanket to your chin. The room is thick with aroma, like a soup kitchen mid-shift. It shouldn't be soothing. But it is. You feel your heartbeat slow. Your hands, raw from slicing, relax. The pillow under your head feels less like a block of damp cotton and more like something that might, just might, welcome your dreams. You think of the thousands of others who tried this. Women in corsets sitting at kitchen tables, slicing quietly while their husbands snored. Men in woolen nightshirts standing over chopping boards in rented rooms. Children watching with wide eyes as mothers performed their nightly onion ballet. Sleep wasn't guaranteed. It never is. But the ritual helped. And sometimes, that's enough. You let your breath match the flicker of the lamp. Your body grows heavy. The onions? Still doing their thing. Or not. You're too tired to care, you return from a dreamless nap, or perhaps you never really slept at all, just blinked too slowly and forgot to stop. But tonight, the experiment continues. This time, you crawl beneath your heavy quilt and slide something unexpected under the bed frame, a small dish of raw onion. Yes. Under the bed. Not on the pillow, not on your chest, tucked neatly beneath the iron legs, nestled between forgotten slippers and the squeaky floorboard you keep meaning to fix. The under-the-bed method is one of Victorian Britain's stranger sleep rituals, and for some inexplicable reason, it stuck around longer than most. The logic, or what passed for logic, was simple: bad dreams, or night vapors, rise from the floor and pass through your sleeping body. The onion, strategically placed, would absorb them. Like a pungent little dream filter. If you snored with your mouth open, all the better, your sins could exit and be caught midair by a root vegetable. Very sanitary. You kneel beside the bed, holding your dish like a priest with an offering. The onion slices sit pale and glistening, fanned like poker cards across the ceramic. You tuck them into position, careful not to knock the chamber pot. Then, satisfied with your strange domestic exorcism, you climb into bed. The first reference to this oddball remedy appears in an 1846 letter between two sisters in Yorkshire. One wrote, "I have laid a dish of spring onion 'neath the cot, and lo, George did not mutter once in his sleep." Historians still argue whether George was a child or an unusually restless goat. Either way, the onion prevailed. The practice gained steam in farming communities, where insulation was poor and smells were constant. People used what they had, and what they had was onions. By 1860, several popular women's magazines recommended placing a raw onion near the bed to dispel night frights and incubus visitations. You didn't need Freud when you had a vegetable to wrestle your subconscious. You try not to think too hard about this. After all, you've tried worse. At least this one doesn't involve rubbing anything on your skin or crying into your toast. Still, you find yourself peeking under the bed now and then, as if the onion might be doing something visible. Is it glowing faintly? Vibrating? Whispering lullabies to your dreams? Of course not. But it's there, bravely absorbing your imaginary chaos. The smell rises slowly, not sharp but present, like someone nearby is quietly preparing soup and doesn't want you to notice. It seeps into the fibers of your nightshirt, into the tiny crevices between your toes. It fills the room not with comfort, but with a kind of raw reassurance: something is happening. You think of the widower who lived down the lane from your great-great-grandmother. He swore he stopped dreaming of his late wife only after placing an onion beneath the floorboards of his bed. It may not have healed him, but it did allow him to sleep, which is a kind of healing. There's something touching in that. The willingness to believe. The quiet conviction that something so ordinary could hold sway over the unconscious. A vegetable, yes, but also a symbol of surrender. Of trusting your body to find its own way down into the soft oblivion of sleep. You breathe deeply now. The smell no longer stings, it envelopes. The flicker of the candle beside you grows slower, as if it, too, is drifting into slumber. You can feel the bed creak beneath your weight, the familiar contours of the pillow against your neck, and below you, that absurd little plate of sliced onion standing guard. The dreams may still come, maybe even the bad ones, but tonight, you have a guardian. Not a saint or a spell. Just a vegetable with layers. And somehow, that feels enough. You slide your feet under the covers and immediately feel the damp squish of something tucked inside your socks. Not unexpected, you put it there. A thin slice of raw onion in each heel, held firmly against your skin by wool and hope. This is the onion sock method. You're not alone. Victorian families swore by it, especially for children who cried through the night or adults who claimed their thoughts clanged like pots. The idea was that the onions would draw out fevers, worries, and even lunatic vibrations through the soles of your feet, where, according to questionable anatomy diagrams of the era, everything bad could be vented. You curl your toes reflexively, the papery edge of a red onion shifting inside the sock. It's not painful, just slimy. The Victorians didn't flinch. They layered their undergarments with goose fat and wore velvet corsets in July. Onion socks were mild by comparison. This particular trick was most common in the Midlands, where folk remedies mixed with old wives' tales and a heavy pinch of desperation. One Midlands pamphlet, Rest for the Common Soul, outlines the routine in great detail. Slice one red onion into 7 rings, no more, no less, and insert into freshly warmed socks, which must be worn for exactly 9 hours. Historians still argue whether the number 9 had symbolic importance or simply reflected the average Victorian workday. You pull the covers tighter and turn your head slightly. Beneath your pillow lies another thin slice of onion. You know what you're doing is ridiculous. The pillow onion, though less discussed in official texts, was a favorite among elderly widows and overly earnest clergymen's wives. Its supposed function? To sweeten dreams. Though, based on the smell currently wafting into your hairline, it's more likely to flavor them. Still, there's something about the layered approach, socks, pillow, underbed plate, that feels oddly comprehensive. Like a security system made of salad. You shut your eyes. The room is still. The distant creak of pipes and settling timbers seems fainter tonight. Either your brain is finally slowing down, or your olfactory senses have simply surrendered. The Victorians would count that as a win. At the time, people understood sleep not as a health necessity, but a kind of moral victory. Falling asleep quickly meant your conscience was clean, your body unburdened. Insomnia, by contrast, was interpreted as punishment. You'd sinned, drunk too much port, read too many French novels, or failed to pray with sincerity. That's why so many sleep remedies had a penitential quality. They required discomfort. You certainly feel that now. The onions in your socks squelch ever so slightly as you shift your weight. The pillow is cool, but the smell is not. And yet, you're relaxing. The combination of heat, scent, and sheer exhaustion is working its way into your shoulders. One account from 1872 described a woman who hadn't slept for 10 nights until she tried a full onion envelopment. She wore sliced onion in her socks, layered under her arms, and, most boldly, placed a ring on her tongue as she lay down. It lasted only 5 minutes before she spat it into the fireplace, but afterward, she fell asleep with rare grace. Historians debate whether this was desperation or early psychosomatic therapy. Or both. You imagine her now, her arms out like a starfish, her house perfumed like a soup cellar, and you can't help but admire the commitment. There's something noble in trying everything. Even if it makes your sheets smell like stew. The candle's flame wavers as a breeze ghosts past the window. Your breathing deepens. You picture the onion slices as talismans, soggy, absurd, but somehow faithful. They don't promise anything. They just show up. And isn't that what sleep is? Not something you command, but something you wait for. Something you invite in with your rituals and hopes and, yes, maybe the occasional root vegetable. You don't remember drifting off. But at some point, the smell fades, or your brain stops caring. The dreams are odd but harmless. There's a goat wearing spectacles. A bathtub on a train. Your old Latin teacher serving soup in a cathedral. All tinged with just the faintest whiff of onion. You'll take it. You wake the next evening to the gentle protest of your ankles, which still remember last night's onion socks with mixed emotions. But there's no turning back now. You're neck deep in the rooty rituals of Victorian slumber, and tonight, you're going straight to the source, the apothecary. The bell above the door jingles as you push into the narrow, dusty shop. Shelves tower over you, packed with stoppered glass bottles and labeled paper parcels. The scent hits you first, lavender, vinegar, a trace of pipe smoke, and yes, the unmistakable tang of onion, dried and ancient. You're not alone in this obsession. The man behind the counter barely glances up. He's sorting a tray of camphor cubes with stained fingers and a blank stare that says he's seen it all, including a woman once who asked for onion-infused sleeping vinegar and then fainted at the price. You browse in silence. Lined up on a high shelf, the jars gleam in the candlelight, Allium cepa, Allium vulgaris, and a bottle marked simply, for nights of disturbance. You pull it down. The label is handwritten in spidery script, distilled onion extract in barley spirits. 2 drops on the tongue, or 1 rubbed on the soles of feet. You grimace slightly. Onion liqueur. But honestly, it's no worse than some of the other cures lining the shop. Laudanum, morphine tablets, crushed pearl powder. You'll stick with your vegetables, thank you very much. Victorian apothecaries were caught in the crosswinds of science and superstition. Half their shelves were real medicine, half hopeful guesswork. Historians still argue whether the rise of botanical cures was a form of resistance to chemical medicine, or simply a matter of affordability. Opium cost money. Onions grew everywhere. You ask about sleep remedies, and the apothecary shuffles over without urgency. You'll be wanting the syrup or the poultice, he asks in a voice like cracked slate. For bad dreams or just plain tossing? You opt for a jar of dried onion peels and a tiny tin of onion balm, apparently meant to be applied to the temples, with a gentle clockwise stroke. You pay a few shillings, which feels steep for something you could have peeled off last night's dinner, but you're committed to the bit now. Back at home, you prepare as instructed. You boil the peels into a tea. The smell is not inviting. It's like someone tried to make broth using only despair. You pour it into a chipped mug and stare at it for a long time before finally taking a sip. It tastes brown. There's no other way to put it. Like if beige were a flavor. You cough once, then finish it with a grimace. You rub the balm on your temples, trying not to think about the flecks of onion pulp embedded in the greasy texture. This is the price of progress. The balm warms your skin slightly. You lie back in bed and try not to overanalyze the situation. It's easy to forget that people once genuinely trusted this process. Not because it worked in a lab, but because it worked in their grandmother's kitchens, their neighbors' attics, in tenements and manors alike. One old record from a Devon apothecary ledger notes that onion extract outsold valerian root for 3 winters in a row. That's not nothing. You close your eyes. The scent is subtler than last night, no sock stuffing this time, just a light haze of onion tea breath and balm. It's almost floral, if you squint with your imagination. Your muscles begin to melt into the mattress. You think briefly of Dr. Pemberton, the eccentric sleep doctor who once claimed that onions whisper calm into the bloodstream. No one ever quite figured out if he was serious, or just had a flair for edible metaphors. You smile faintly. The tea has done something, maybe nothing medicinal, but it's slowed your thinking. That's the real cure, isn't it? Not the onion, but the process of preparing it. The focus. The absurdity. The comfort of doing what thousands before you did when sleep wouldn't come. Tonight, you drift more easily. The balm tingles. The tea settles. The air is quiet. The jar of dried peels sits beside your bed like a sleepy little talisman, and for the first time in days, you don't feel like you have to try to fall asleep. You just do. You wake with a start. Not from a nightmare, but from a sneeze. It echoes through the room with unladylike force. The culprit? A soft, translucent onion slice that slid out from under your pillow and now clings lovingly to your upper lip. You peel it away with the resigned sigh of someone who's given up explaining themselves to the universe. Tonight, though, you're after something more refined. Less apothecary, more aristocratic. Because as strange as it sounds, raw onion sleep cures weren't just the domain of muddy-booted farmers and penny-pinching grandmothers. No, high society had its own brand of onion obsession. The duchesses were in on it, too. You're in the parlor of a well-appointed townhouse, somewhere in Kensington, perhaps. The wallpaper is floral. The armchairs are velvet. The tea is tepid. And the lady of the house is holding court over a crystal bowl of, you guessed it, onions. I do declare, she says, waving her fan dramatically, it was the onion vapors that cured Algernon's midnight pacing. Not the clergyman, not the laudanum. It was simply a steamed walla walla on the hearth. The others nod solemnly. The woman beside her, a baroness in pearls and poor health, leans forward. You must tell me the method, she breathes. My husband still talks in his sleep. Something about marmalade and vengeance. You sip your tea and pretend not to eavesdrop, but every word is golden. This wasn't fiction. Victorian high society flirted with folk cures when doctors proved expensive, ineffective, or simply fashionably passé. A sort of medicinal exoticism took root, cures that smacked of rustic charm, even if they involved stinking up your parlors. One popular book, A Lady's Guide to Nocturnal Serenity, included an entire chapter titled, Of Onions and Other Honest Fragrances. Its illustrations featured satin-wrapped onion sachets to be worn at the waist or tucked beneath the bust at bedtime. You imagine the corsetry required to keep those in place, and wince accordingly. Historians still argue whether these aristocratic onion rituals were genuine or performative, another chance for the upper crust to dabble in eccentricity and call it health. But documented letters from that era tell us enough. One countess wrote to her sister, I have taken to sleeping with a half-simmered shallot near the bedstead. It offends the staff, but my dreams are blessedly dull. Dull dreams were, in Victorian terms, the Holy Grail. No fevered visions, no shadowy apparitions of deceased relatives. Just 8 blessed hours of gentle, grey unconsciousness. Onion, it seemed, was the path. Tonight, inspired by the Duchess, you attempt the parlor cure. You take a whole sweet onion, steam it gently over a kettle, then place it in a silver dish atop the mantel in your bedroom. Not near your face this time. No socks, no scalp. Just ambience. Upper-class onion energy. You sit in your nightclothes and watch it glow in the firelight. The smell is assertive, but not aggressive. You imagine yourself as a lady of means, waving your fan and declaring confidently to your peers that you no longer dream in violent hues. There's something undeniably soothing in that image. Perhaps that's what these rituals offered more than anything else, control. In an age when medicine was mysterious, death was unpredictable, and women had limited autonomy, placing an onion on the mantelpiece gave you one small, pungent victory. The fire crackles softly. The room darkens as you douse the lamp. The onion sweats gently in its dish, a quiet sentinel against unrest. You lie back, hands folded across your stomach like a statue in a chapel, and feel yourself begin to soften at the edges. Tomorrow, your room will reek. Your nightgown will need airing. But tonight, you are drifting on clouds of nobly sanctioned sulfur. You are a duchess of drowsiness. A baroness of bedtime. And if anyone judges you, well, let them try sleeping without their own onion. You awake to faint scratching, a carriage will maybe, or the neighbor's cat executing its usual pre-dawn crimes. But no matter. You roll over, groggy, and contemplate your next olfactory experiment. Tonight is not about elegance. No parlor onions or Duchess-approved sachets. Tonight, you enter the trenches of Victorian domestic warfare, the mustard-onion debate. Oh yes. You've stumbled into a household divided. On one side, Team Mustard Plaster. Advocates of sting and sizzle, of slathered paste pressed against the spine until the skin turns politely red. On the other, Team Onion Poultice. Milder, wetter, and substantially smellier. Both sworn to their sleep-inducing superiority. And both armed with leaflets, opinions, and the occasional passive-aggressive letter to the editor. You sit at your worn kitchen table, squinting at a brittle pamphlet titled Rest Without Rage, the Modern Sleep Debate. The front page declares, mustard will lull what onion cannot. Beneath it, a drawing of a woman in a nightcap applying a smear of something ominously dark to her lower back. Mustard plasters were the more aggressive cousin in this family of sleep remedies. The idea was that the sharpness of mustard would stimulate blood flow, drawing the restlessness out through the pores. The drawback? It also drew out any lingering dignity. People regularly woke with mustard burns and bedclothes that smelled like expired picnics. You opt for a compromise. The hybrid technique. One side of your chest, mustard paste. The other, onion mash. A battlefield of pungency. A yin-yang of discomfort. You imagine Victorian newspapers debating such daring techniques in their domestic sections. Madam, I must object to your correspondent's advice to mix the mustard with onion juice. Such cohabitation of condiments is uncouth and ungodly. Historians still argue whether the mustard-onion debate was rooted in real medical distinction or just the typical tribalism that emerges whenever humans have too many free evenings and not enough streaming services. It may have been class-based, with mustard favored by rural folk, who grew it, and onions by those near markets. Or perhaps it was simply a matter of temperament. If you wanted to feel something while trying to sleep, you slapped on mustard. If you preferred a slow suffocation by scent, onion it was. You lie back and let the madness settle in. The poultice begins to warm. The mustard prickles like tiny ants staging a protest. The room smells like an argument between a salad and a fever dream. And yet, you're oddly calm. Maybe it's the absurdity of the situation. Maybe it's the idea that people really did this, night after night, in boarding houses and brownstones and manors. They rubbed themselves raw in the hope of just a few quiet hours. You think of a letter published in the Illustrated Sleep Companion in 1857. My wife has taken to the onion side. I, the mustard. We sleep back to back in aromatic truce, and I must say, we wake more rested, if not more affectionate. There's comfort in that. A shared insanity. You picture couples all across England peeling onions in silence, arguing over ratios of mash to mustard, waking up in slightly scorched sheets and calling it progress. The warmth spreads slowly across your chest. One side tingles with fiery mustard bite, the other sweats in onion's gentle stew. You breathe through your mouth and try not to think about the smell. It's like falling asleep in a deli. But it's working. Your thoughts grow sluggish. The air thickens. The bed creaks as you sink deeper into it. You can almost hear Victorian voices in the distance, debating through the wallpaper. And just as your body slips toward sleep, a single question whispers through your mind. What if the goat wore both? And then, blessedly, there's nothing, you wake with the sensation that someone has been cooking under your duvet. The mustard side of your chest is tingling with faint regret, while the onion side has imprinted a smell so deep into your pores that even your dreams have started smelling like soup. You stretch, wince, and consider, briefly, just returning to normal sleeping methods. But of course, you won't. Because tonight, you're investigating something even stranger than onion socks and parlor sachets, the Victorian belief that onions could cleanse the bedroom air and, in doing so, prevent restless sleep caused by bad vapors. You light a candle and begin your bedtime preparations, Victorian style. That means flinging open the window, even in winter, and setting a bowl of sliced onion right in the center of the room. Not beside your head. Not under the bed. Right there on the nightstand like a noble, pungent centerpiece. This isn't just about fragrance anymore. This is about atmosphere, literally. In the 1800s, many people believed that air itself could be noxious, heavy with invisible particles that stirred fevers, madness, and most annoyingly, insomnia. If you were anxious or sleepless, the air was surely stale, and onions, bless them, could absorb that corruption. The theory wasn't completely without precedent. Onions were known to darken after a night left out, suggesting they had drawn something from their environment. What that something was, nobody could agree. Historians still argue whether this belief was a leftover from medieval miasma theory or an early, if wildly inaccurate, foray into germ theory. Either way, the onion became a sponge for the invisible sins of your sitting room. You place your bowl carefully. Tonight, you've chosen red onions, sliced into neat crescents, displayed with the care usually reserved for floral arrangements. They glisten. They gleam. They wait. As you blow out your candle, the room settles into that velvet kind of darkness that only comes after the fire dies and the city outside holds its breath. You lie in bed and breathe. The air is different. Not exactly pleasant, but sharper. More alive. You remember reading about a household in Cornwall where the entire family placed bowls of onion in every room each night, convinced it protected not just their lungs but their dreams. No spirits dare wander through the onion's line, the mother allegedly told her neighbor, who was later found trying to string spring onions over her baby's crib like garlic. You smile into your pillow. The image is absurd, but then, so is this entire routine. And yet here you are, willingly marinating in ancestral folklore because your brain won't stop planning tomorrow's errands when you close your eyes. There's also a touch of theatricality to it. Imagine being a Victorian host, ushering guests to their chamber with a flick of your candle and saying, "Please excuse the onions, they guard against nightmares." One guest book entry from a Yorkshire manor in 1879 reads, "A fine sleep beneath the watchful eye of 3 onions. Shall attempt the same at home, though I fear Mrs. G. may object." That entry is underlined twice, in what appears to be either admiration or suppressed trauma. Back in your own room, the air feels heavier now. Not suffocating, but expectant. Like the onion is doing battle with some ancient, invisible force while you get the luxury of just lying there. You imagine tiny vapors being pulled into those slices, ghosts of anxieties, tendrils of unwanted thoughts. You picture the onions going dark with your worries, sacrificing themselves so your nervous system can catch its breath. Eventually, your breath grows longer. Slower. You feel your limbs melt into the mattress. The onion bowl stands silent on the nightstand, a ridiculous but loyal guardian. And just before you drift off, you murmur, half joking, half sincere. "Cleanse the air. Absorb the dreams. Smell me into stillness." You think maybe you're smiling as you fall asleep. Hard to tell. The dark has already taken you. You stir awake to a dry mouth and the faint suspicion that your dreams last night were slightly more root vegetable themed than usual. There'd been a ballroom. And an onion in a waistcoat. You made polite conversation about sleep tinctures until he transformed into a sofa. You try not to read too much into it. Tonight, however, you're embarking on one of the most peculiar and widely disputed onion-related insomnia cures of the Victorian age, the onion whisper. That is, the belief that simply talking to your onion before bed could help you sleep. You heard right. The theory went something like this: if you confided your daily worries to a raw onion, especially one cut in half and placed beside your bed, the onion would absorb not just vapors from the air, but emotions from your soul. Very high-maintenance vegetable behavior. You feel slightly ridiculous holding a halved onion like a therapist in a crisp apron, but you sit at the edge of your bed and give it a go. You clear your throat. "Well," you say softly, "I didn't get much done today." No response, of course. Just the soft, acrid bite of sulfur rising in the air. "I keep thinking I've forgotten something. There's a letter I never answered. A lamp I never fixed. And I think I might have hurt someone's feelings last week." The onion is silent, yet deeply judgmental. Still, you continue. You confess to small things. That you talk to yourself too much. That you fear being boring. That you haven't made peace with the fact that your memory is starting to fray at the edges. You even admit that you've begun to enjoy the smell, just a little. According to various 19th century sleep manuals, this wasn't lunacy, it was practice. They recommended nightly confessionals to the onion, followed by placing the emotionally charged half on the mantel or near the pillow. The idea was borrowed, loosely, from the ancient belief in sentient roots, that certain plants had a metaphysical sensitivity to human states. Historians still argue whether this was pure poetic nonsense or a clever early version of cognitive behavioral therapy, displacing emotion onto an object as a way of clearing the mind. One scholar called it vegetal venting. Another dismissed it as talking into a salad. But some took it seriously. A woman named Eunice Waddington published a slim volume titled Evening Dialogues with Onions, in which she transcribed her imagined onions' responses. They were mostly vague reassurances like, "You are sufficient," and "Boil me gently and worry not. You're not quite that far gone. But you do feel better after your little chat." You place the half onion on the sill, flat side down. You don't expect it to change your life, but the act of voicing what nags at you is unexpectedly soothing. The room grows quiet. The candle flickers low. Your limbs, newly unburdened by confession, begin to unwind. There's something childlike about the ritual. As if you're telling a story to the dark and trusting it to carry your worries away. The onion, for its part, gleams slightly in the candlelight, its layers catching the glow like folds of some ancient, edible wisdom. You think of all the people who once sat where you are now. Thousands of them. Pouring out their fears to vegetables because doctors were too expensive and journals were too judgmental. One particularly moving account from 1884 describes a widower who whispered his late wife's name into an onion every night for a year, until he finally slept without dreaming of her. Maybe it's foolish. Or maybe it's faith, in the smallest, strangest form. You lie down, the scent gentle now. Just a whisper. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you hear the echo of your own voice, soft and silly, floating back to you from that damp little half onion on the sill. "I think I'm doing okay, actually. And for tonight, that's more than enough." You drift awake with the unmistakable sense that something is wrong. The air feels heavier than usual. Denser. You sit up and look around. And that's when you realize, you forgot to set out the onion. The room feels unguarded. You can almost hear the Victorian voices whispering in horror. No onion? Not even a peel? It's like stepping into a ballroom barefoot. Worse, like sleeping without prayers. You toss back the covers and shuffle to the kitchen in your dressing gown, the floorboards cold against your heels. You grab the first thing you can find, a small white onion, sprouting slightly from the top like it's already trying to grow away from you. It'll do. But tonight, rather than simply place it on a dish or rub it onto your temples like a particularly rustic spa-goer, you're going deeper, the raw onion compress. The idea was grotesquely simple and surprisingly popular. Slice an onion. Wrap it in cheesecloth or thin muslin. Warm it briefly. Then place it directly onto the chest, neck, or belly, wherever you felt the restlessness came from. According to one guidebook, this method allowed the onion to draw forth the agitations of the spirit lodged in the blood. You can almost hear the doctor now. "Yes, madam, your liver is brooding again. Only an onion compress will silence its mutiny." Historians still argue whether this had any real physiological effect. Some suggest it mimicked the benefits of a hot compress, the warmth relaxing muscles, the onion's sulfurous compounds perhaps reducing inflammation. Others say it was purely symbolic, an earthly body absorbing spiritual clutter. You prepare the compress carefully. The muslin is soft, the onion slices slightly warmed on a ceramic plate near the stove. You fold the cloth, press it against your chest, and lean back into bed. The effect is immediate. Warm. Damp. Heavy. Like a small, well-meaning cat has settled on your ribs and refuses to leave. You lie still. The smell is stronger than ever, direct, unfiltered, no longer trying to hide behind tea or balm. This is onion in its truest form, bold, unapologetic, slightly medicinal. And strangely, it comforts you. You imagine yourself as a patient in a 19th-century convalescent home. Pale, fragile, wrapped in layers of blankets, with a kind nurse changing your onion compress every 2 hours. The doctor enters the room and notes your improved color. You thank the vegetable silently. This particular method was favored in German immigrant communities in northern England, where folk medicine traditions held strong. One grandmother reportedly swore by onion compresses to settle sour nerves, and even used it to calm her husband when he began speaking in his sleep about invading Prussia. You think about how desperate one must be to try something like this and mean it. How tired. How hope-starved. And yet here you are, 150 years later, willingly pressing kitchen produce to your chest in the name of sleep. The warmth spreads. Your breathing deepens. The pressure is oddly grounding, like you've been gently paperweighted by nature itself. You think of a line from an old sleep manual. Let thy breath mingle with the onion's gift, and thou shalt enter slumber on softened feet. You always liked that image, softened feet. Like all the heaviness drains down and out, leaving only the quiet. Your thoughts drift toward gentler things. Old kitchens. Patchwork quilts. People who believed that nature still had something to teach them, something gentle, even if it stank a little. The compress cools slightly, and you begin to nod off. You adjust the cloth but don't bother replacing it. Tonight, it's enough. You're not sure if the onion actually pulls anything from your blood. But maybe it pulls something from your mind. Or maybe, like most rituals, it works because you want it to. You fall asleep wrapped in warmth and absurdity. Exactly as the Victorians would have hoped, the compress from last night lies in a damp heap on your nightstand, its muslin stained, its onion slices limp and defeated. You look at them with a mix of gratitude and mild concern, like a battlefield medic who's lost too many vegetables. Tonight, your plan is more ceremonial. You've reached the part of your journey where onion sleep rituals met Victorian spiritualism. Yes, truly, onions and the afterlife. You light a single candle and draw the curtains. Shadows shift across the room like theater performers waiting for their cue. Tonight, you're conducting what one 1882 pamphlet called a root circle, a kind of seance light, but with vegetables instead of ghosts. You find the passage again in Somniferous Shadows, a treatise on the night realms. The author, a certain Dr. Ignatius Belton, writes, "When layered in a circle about the bed, the onion may interrupt spiritual murmurings and protect the soul from dream infiltration." You blink at the page. Dream infiltration sounds like a fancy way of describing nightmares. But apparently, Victorians believed that sleep made one vulnerable to thin place influences, phantoms, spiritual residue, or even the unquiet dead. And onions, in their earthy wisdom, were supposed to block those energies. You prepare your defenses. 8 onions, sliced in half. You place them carefully on the floor around your bed, one at each cardinal point, and the others filling in the gaps. It smells like a farmer's market exploded in a haunted house. The arrangement complete, you settle into bed with a sense of something old and strange curling around the edges of your thoughts. You try to ignore the tickle of paranoia rising in your spine. You remind yourself, the Victorians didn't separate science and spiritualism the way we do now. Seances and scalpels shared parlors. A doctor might prescribe ether and then consult a spirit board if it didn't work. Historians still argue whether this blending came from desperation, curiosity, or just an unshakable need to make sense of the unknown. You remember reading about Lady Morrigan St. James, a noted spiritualist who insisted that she dreamed only of angels after circling her canopied bed with a ring of pickled onions each night. Her letters suggest a deep conviction in the onion's ability to ground the soul in the flesh. You're not quite sure what that means, but it's dramatic, and you respect it. Lying in your onion circle, you feel slightly ridiculous, but also safe. The air smells like soup and candle wax. You feel watched, but in a gentle way. As if the onions, somehow, are bearing witness to your bedtime battle. Your thoughts begin to blur. You drift toward the edge of sleep, half expecting to see your own great-grandmother at the foot of the bed whispering advice through a veil of shallots. But all that comes is stillness. And in that stillness, something does feel different. Heavier. Rooted. You imagine dreams creeping toward you like fog, only to hit the invisible onion perimeter and dissolve, turned away by whatever protective charm these vegetables allegedly hold. Eventually, you sleep. Deep, unbroken. A kind of velvet quiet wraps around your mind, and for the first time in ages, not even a flicker of dream flicks behind your eyes. Just breath. And dark. And the silent guardians at your feet, keeping watch in their sulfuric silence. You may never tell anyone you did this. But something about it worked. And maybe that's all that matters, you wake in absolute stillness. Not the kind that follows noise, but the kind that settles when a room has remembered how to exhale. The onion circle lies where you left it, save one slice that slid slightly closer to the bed, just enough to make you wonder if it moved, or was moved. You nudge it back into place with your toe and say a quiet thank you, as if the onions might be listening. Tonight, you decide to give your skin a break. No compresses, no socks, no dabbing balm onto your temples like a human pot roast. You're trying a purely inhalational remedy this time, Victorian onion incense. Yes, they actually tried that. You set up your little brazier by the window, Victorian style. On the coals, a mix of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, and finely chopped, slowly dehydrated onion skins. You read the method in a tattered copy of the Domestic Repose Almanac, 1868 edition. Page 93, under Odorous Preparations for Restful Slumber. When burned with due restraint, the allium may quiet nerves, clear rooms of heavy spirit, and hasten the moral descent into rest. You're not entirely sure about the moral descent part, but the rest sounds promising. As the mixture begins to smoke, a strange scent rises, warm and woody, a little bitter, like roasted straw mixed with garden soil. Not quite onion. Not quite pleasant. But oddly clean. You sit nearby, breathing it in slowly. There's something earthy about it. Like you're in a cottage with a dirt floor and a fire that never quite dies. This method was rare, but not unheard of. Historians still argue whether the idea came from Romani traditions, Eastern influence, or sheer Victorian innovation during a particularly sleepless winter. Some spiritual guides of the 1870s swore that burned onion skin opened the spiritual nostrils, whatever that means. One Dr. Hargrave claimed in a letter that a whiff of burning onion could dispel nightmares more effectively than a priest with a bell. I have seen it drive off sleep paralysis in grown men, he wrote, though it may drive off their wives as well. You lean back and let the fumes roll gently toward the ceiling. No incense stick could ever match this for sheer personality. The smoke curls in lazy spirals. You watch it like a fortune teller might watch steam rise from a teacup. It's not relaxing in the way lavender is. But it's anchoring. You feel heavier. As if you've been reminded that your body belongs here, not up in the clouds of overthinking. Your thoughts slow, drag their heels a little. They smell like caramelized discomfort and damp wisdom. You wonder how many Victorian children were lulled to sleep by the smell of onion smoke wafting through keyholes. You picture them nestled under quilts, the scent curling through their hair like a bedtime story without words. Perhaps that's why some journals called it ghost scent, not because it repelled ghosts, but because it felt like one. You lie back as the smoke thins. There's no headache, no cough. Just a vague awareness that the world outside your window is turning slowly under a quilt of fog. That your body is warm. That something old and strange is guiding your breath. And somehow, you're already halfway to sleep before you realize you never even closed your eyes. Just the rhythm. Just the smoke. Just the memory of an old, stubborn vegetable being burned in hope. It worked then. And maybe, just maybe, it's working now. You wake with your mouth slightly open and the faintest trace of onion smoke still drifting through your sinuses. It's not unpleasant, more like waking inside an old storybook, one that smells like burnt parchment and sleepy kitchens. Your pillow has a faint crunch from where a bit of ash must have landed during the night, but at this point, you're beyond surprise. Tonight, you're chasing the most elusive of all Victorian onion sleep techniques. Not a poultice, not a balm, not a tea. But rather, the onion charm. Not to be confused with magical talismans or garlic-based vampire lore, the Victorian onion charm was a tiny ritual item, a small, dried, hollowed onion skin filled with herbs or moss, tied with red thread, and tucked into a pillow or pocket. Its purpose? To entrap roaming thoughts, according to a London pamphlet titled Tokens Against Turmoil, published in 1875. You're intrigued, obviously. You gather your supplies with something resembling reverence. A small yellow onion, carefully peeled. A bit of dried thyme, lavender, and a pinch of coarse salt, because the booklet insists the salt grounds the root's memory. Whatever that means. You stuff the delicate shell with the herbs, handling it like it's made of spiderwebs, then seal it gently with a loop of red thread. It looks absurd. Like a Halloween decoration designed by a sleep-deprived doll maker. But when you place it inside your pillowcase, something about it just fits. Like it belongs there. As if your pillow now has a secret, a crunchy, vegetable-based secret. According to Victorian belief, the onion charm acted like a dream filter. Not in the New Age crystal sense, but in a deeply practical one. It absorbed stray, anxious thoughts before they could ferment into sleeplessness. Like a dream catcher, but humbler. Slightly smellier. Less commercialized. One diary entry from 1891 describes a widowed seamstress who made an onion charm every Sunday night. "It draws the week out of my head," she wrote, "and I sleep empty." Another mentions a child whose night terrors ceased after his grandmother sewed a little onion pod into his quilt lining. Historians still argue whether this was a psychological placebo, a folk adaptation of mummification rites, which often involved onions, or simply a case of bedtime desperation dressed up in poetic nonsense. Either way, it worked for them. You lie down, head sinking into the pillow, now slightly lumpier than before. There's a faint, almost metallic rustle as the onion charm shifts. You smile despite yourself. The night is quiet. The breeze from the open window brings the scent of distant rain and something green. For a long while, you just breathe. And then the thoughts arrive, those little buzzing ones that usually wait until your body goes still. Did you say something awkward earlier? What if you forget that appointment? Are you aging gracefully or just disintegrating politely? You imagine the charm working, not dramatically, not with sparks or flashes, but like a little sleepy librarian behind your eyes, taking each thought gently and tucking it away in a drawer labeled later. Not never. Just not tonight. The herbs shift. The salt whispers. And your mind begins to float. You picture that seamstress again, tying her thread in the dim candlelight, whispering a quiet prayer not to God, but to rest itself. And you think, maybe the onion doesn't catch your dreams. Maybe it just reminds you that you can let go. You wake slowly, the pillow crinkling gently beneath your ear as the onion charm shifts again. It's settled deeper into the case now, as if burrowing in for the long haul, like it's decided that yes, this is its home too. You stretch, blink into the gray light, and note with mild surprise that you didn't wake even once during the night. There's a stillness in your limbs, as though someone unplugged your mind while you weren't looking. But you're not done. Not yet. Because tonight, you turn to one of the most eyebrow-raising, eyebrow-singeing, and thoroughly bizarre practices of all. The raw onion inhaler. Not an inhaler in the modern medical sense, no. This was Victorian DIY engineering at its finest. A small brass or ceramic cone, sometimes a snuff box with holes punched in it, filled with grated or chopped raw onion. You'd hold it to your nose and take several deep, slow breaths before bedtime. The theory? That concentrated onion vapor would stimulate the nervous system just enough to calm it down afterward, like shouting into a tunnel just to hear the silence that follows. You assemble your version with what you have: a small clay pot, a bit of mesh across the top, and an aggressively fresh white onion grated within an inch of its life. The result is, how to put this, violent. Your eyes water from a distance. Your nose preps for battle. But you're here now. You bring the makeshift inhaler up, gently, reverently. Inhale. Immediate regret. It's like being punched in the face by a particularly disappointed Victorian farmer. Your sinuses explode with sulfur. You see colors not native to this realm. And yet, oddly, you also feel clear. Once the coughing dies down, you try again. This time slower, gentler. The sting fades just a little. Then another breath. And another. The old manuals swore by it. Breathe as though the onion were your last word, wrote a clergyman-turned-herbalist in 1878. And then lie down to sleep as though you'd spoken it. There were entire households that kept bedside inhalers. Some were ornate, silver-plated. Others were Old Spice tins with a few holes and a prayer. Children were encouraged to take onion puffs before being tucked in. Mothers swore it helped settle nighttime fears and suppressed coughs alike. Historians still argue whether the inhalers were really about sleep at all, or whether they were originally meant for sinus congestion and just got adopted into the wider bedtime ritual culture. There's some evidence they evolved from mustard snuff boxes used during cholera outbreaks, with the onion as a milder substitute. Either way, the practice stuck. You try one last inhale. The burn is sharp but clean. You can feel it in the back of your throat, like a warm warning. It doesn't make you sleepy, but it empties you. Like a system flush. You set the pot down and lean back into your pillow, onion charms still nestled beneath your head. Your eyes feel strangely open, but your thoughts don't feel like racing. More like waiting politely in line. There's a lull between inhale and sleep. You float in that moment longer than usual. The onion did not sedate you. It disrupted you. And then left you with the silence that disruption made. Some Victorians believed that insomnia wasn't about being too awake, but not being startled out of your wakefulness enough. The shock of the onion sting was like ringing a bell in the middle of your nervous system. Afterwards, it had no choice but to quiet down. As your breath evens, you feel that quiet take hold. Not the kind brought by exhaustion, but the strange peace that comes after surviving something ridiculous and telling no one. You fall asleep, onion-scented and cleared out, with the absurd confidence of someone who just huffed a vegetable and found serenity. You wake as if from beneath water, slowly, gently, with no memory of the moment when sleep arrived. The raw onion inhaler sits peacefully on your nightstand, looking smug, like a tiny chamber pot full of triumph. The room smells faintly of breakfast, even though it's not yet dawn. But you've entered the final phase now, the deep cuts, the forgotten fringe, the remedies whispered between laundry lines and scribbled in the margins of penny newspapers. Tonight, onion shoes. Yes. You read that correctly. Onion shoes. The theory was straightforward, if not entirely sane. Slice onions and place them inside your slippers or boots. Wear them for at least 15 minutes before bed, or, if you were truly committed, throughout the evening, so that the soles of your feet would draw in the vegetable's grounding properties. It sounds ridiculous until you remember that people used to bathe in mercury and call it medicine. You prepare your onion shoes with the solemnity of a monk preparing a sacred relic. Thick slices, slightly chilled, pressed into your house slippers like sweaty insoles. The effect, upon sliding your feet in, is immediate, cold. Squishy. Humbling. Victorians, especially in rural communities, believed the soles of the feet were a sacred portal, where illness entered, and health could be summoned. There's even a letter from a vicar in Devonshire who swore that his nightly foot onion ritual sent sleep up the leg like wine. You pace the room awkwardly in your fragrant footwear, trying not to squish too aggressively. You imagine your ancestors watching from some spiritual realm, nodding approvingly or perhaps just shaking their heads. Historians still argue whether the practice was influenced by Chinese medicine, which recognized acupressure points in the feet long before Victorian England caught on. Others suggest it was simply a superstition born from correlation. You put on onion shoes, you eventually got tired from walking in them, and then you slept. But there's something oddly meditative about it. The slow, deliberate step. The cold, biting sting at your soles. You begin to believe, against all logic, that the onions are doing something. Pulling the day out of your legs. Anchoring your thoughts downward, away from your endlessly spinning head. 1874 Home Manual states. To those who are plagued with anxious whirlings of the upper mind, place the onion at the foot, and rest shall descend like snow on a lamp. The phrase sticks with you. Snow on a lamp. Soft. Undeniable. Slightly tragic. After 20 minutes of this silent shuffle, you sit down, peel the onions out from your slippers, and discard them like used tea bags. Your feet are cold but calm, as if they've walked through something older than reason. You climb into bed. No compress tonight. No smoke. Just feet that remember their ritual, and a heart that's grateful someone else thought of this first. The quiet comes faster now. Like it's waiting for you. Like the onion has whispered ahead. You think, as you drift off, about the lengths people will go to for sleep. How they'll believe in herbs, in ghosts, in pungent roots, just for the chance to rest. How none of it makes sense, and all of it somehow does. And with your feet freshly seasoned, your mind gently emptied, and your dreams already fogging the windows of your thoughts, you sleep, you wake to feet that feel like they spent the night absorbing secrets. There's a faint tingle in your soles, not unpleasant, just onioned. You stretch, yawn, and take a slow, indulgent sniff of the room. Still a touch of vegetable tang in the air, like your bedroom moonlights as a soup cellar. You've long passed the point of caring. Tonight, you prepare for what may be the most stubbornly homespun of all Victorian insomnia rituals. The onion nightcap. Not metaphorical. Literal. A cap. Filled with onion. Victorian homemakers, especially in colder rural regions, believed that warm vapors from raw, gently crushed onions could lull even the most twitchy-brained person into sleep. The method? Stuff a cloth cap with a few thin slices, tie it snug around the crown of the head, and let the heat of your scalp do the rest. You retrieve your sleep hat, in your case, an old beanie, stretched loose from winters past. Inside goes a cheesecloth bundle of finely chopped yellow onion, slightly warmed in the oven to activate the vapor spirit, as one 1863 Remedy book dramatically put it. As you pull the cap onto your head, you pause. You look at yourself in the mirror. You are now a human onion dumpling. You laugh softly. And then you sit, feeling the warmth start to rise around your temples. It's strangely soothing. The Victorians claimed the aroma traveling directly to the brain, via the inner windways, their term for the nasal passages, helped dampen overactive thoughts and dislodge unwanted spiritual residues. One herbalist claimed it could prevent nightmares caused by wicked proximity to the thoughts of others, whatever that means. Historians still argue whether the onion nightcap emerged as a parody or a real remedy. Some suggest it started as a domestic joke between sisters and was misinterpreted by regional newspapers. Others believe it has roots in ancient Roman garlic sleep rituals, which were later softened for Victorian tastes, or at least, made less vampire-themed. Either way, people did it. There are letters. Sketches. A pamphlet titled Of Night and Root, which includes a very serious illustration of a man lying on a divan with a small onion crown perched atop his head, expression beatific. You lie down and let the heat gather beneath the cap. The smell blooms gently, not sharp like last night's inhaler, but mellow, toasted, vaguely floral. You imagine your scalp breathing it in. your brain reclining deeper into the soft steam of sleep. It's hard not to imagine the scenes of yesteryear. Children lined up like pilgrims, each with their own onion bonnet. A mother adjusting the knot of her son's cap as he whined about smelling like dinner. A father muttering that this was all nonsense, but still wearing his onion hat every night without fail. In one handwritten account, a retired lamplighter described his ritual. I never felt lonely in the dark, so long as I had my onion cap. It whispered in my hair. You try to imagine what it whispered. Likely something like, "You're ridiculous, but you're home." The warmth settles deeper. Your thoughts soften, slide to the edges. The pillow feels more forgiving tonight, as if respecting your commitment. You think of all the things your ancestors tried. The crushed seeds, the vinegar rubs, the midnight footbaths, the whispered prayers into pickling jars. They stitched comfort from scraps and stench. And tonight, so do you. You fall asleep slowly, gently, wearing a crown that no one would envy, but that maybe, just maybe, guards your peace better than any golden one ever could. You wake with your onion nightcap slightly askew and the vague sensation that you've spent the evening marinating your scalp. There's a damp patch on the pillow, but otherwise, all is quiet. You remove the cap, now gently steamed with sleep and sulfur, and set it aside like a retired champion. Tonight, though, you're turning your attention away from things worn or sniffed, and toward something swallowed. Yes, the moment has come for the boldest cure of all. The raw onion tonic. You take a deep breath and steady your nerves. Because this isn't just a nibble or a garnish. This is a drink. And not a fancy infusion with cloves or honey. No. This is Victorian folk medicine in its most aggressively rustic form. A chopped onion, steeped in warm water for several hours, occasionally mixed with sugar or a touch of cider vinegar. Strain. Sip slowly before bed. Supposedly clears the mind, soothes the stomach, and calls the heart downward into rest, according to a Welsh sleep guide from 1859. You prepare it with grim determination. A small jar. Half an onion. Boiled water. A lid. You wait. The room smells like something between a footbath and a failed stew. After 2 hours, the mixture looks pale gold, with fine particles floating like little ghosts of better judgment. You strain it into a cup and consider your life choices. The first sip is unexpected. Not as sharp as you'd feared. Slightly sweet. Earthy. Like biting into an apology from the garden. You sip again, more slowly this time. Victorian rural communities often swore by it, particularly for children who ran too hot with worry. It was seen as a last resort, a kind of liquid lullaby for the agitated and overtired. Mothers would warm the tonic on a hearthstone and tell stories of the onion's calming breath, while the child drank and blinked away their stubborn wakefulness. Historians still argue whether the sleepiness came from the onion's chemical makeup. Some compounds do interact mildly with digestion and relaxation, or from sheer exhaustion caused by enduring the taste. One doctor in Bath wrote in 1873, "It is the drink of resignation. No man can sip a warm onion broth and continue to believe in the importance of his problems." You're beginning to see what he meant. Halfway through the cup, something shifts. Your shoulders relax. Your stomach quiets. Your thoughts no longer swirl like storm water in a clogged drain. They drift. Settle. And even though the taste still clings faintly to the back of your throat, you feel strangely grateful. There's a comfort in the ritual, in doing something utterly unnecessary that somehow makes the night feel more possible. You finish the cup. Set it down. Breathe. No dreams arrive quickly. But neither do the thoughts. Just stillness. Just a warm belly and the knowledge that you've honored an absurd tradition, shared by candlelit strangers across time who once sipped the same strange broth and hoped, like you, for sleep. And as you drift, you imagine them, tucked under quilts, the clink of spoon and mug, the hush of old floors, the the gentle sigh that comes just before dreams. You wake slowly, and this time, the quiet is so complete that you wonder if the world has paused for a moment to let you catch up. There's no trace of the onion tonic's flavor on your tongue anymore, just the ghost of warmth in your chest, like the memory of someone humming you to sleep. By now, the strange rhythm of your nightly onion rituals has settled into something like comfort. You've worn them, breathed them, whispered to them. But tonight, you'll attempt what the Victorians called the onion vigil. It's not quite what it sounds like. No fasting. No prayers. No long robes or chanting. Just this. You sit beside a peeled onion at dusk and watch it. Nothing more. You simply watch it. It was believed, particularly in the more mystically inclined corners of Victorian society, that if one sat with an onion for 30 minutes in perfect stillness, the mind would mirror the vegetable's gradual stilling. The practice appears in a handful of obscure sleep diaries and a book titled Midnight Hygiene, Domestic Rest Without Tonic or Sin. Skeptical? Of course you are. So were many Victorians. But those who tried it insisted that the simple act of being still with something else that was also doing absolutely nothing was enough to coax their nervous systems into surrender. You choose a particularly firm red onion, place it on a saucer, and set it on the table across from your chair. You dim the lights. Light a small candle. And you sit. At first, it's ridiculous. Your mind leaps and jabs. You think about messages you forgot to answer. Dishes. Taxes. Toenails. The onion stares back in silence. Minute 5. You start inventing personalities for it. A stern teacher. A retired naval officer. You chuckle under your breath. The onion doesn't laugh. Minute 10. Your thoughts begin to slow, not disappear, just stretch out, like cats in patches of sun. The candle flickers. The shadows grow longer. Minute 15. Something strange happens. You stop thinking about yourself. And you start noticing the onion. Really noticing. The tightness of its skin. The way the candlelight reflects faintly in its curves. How still it is. How much space it's willing to occupy without effort. Historians still argue whether the onion vigil was a proto-meditation technique or just a parlor game gone sideways. Some claim it was adapted from Zen practices misinterpreted by travelers. Others say it was born of sheer loneliness, people using produce to simulate companionship. But in more than one letter, the phrase, onion companionship, appears unironically. And sitting here now, you begin to understand. The onion does not ask. Does not entertain. It merely is. Minute 25. You feel your breathing deepen. The thoughts come slower now, fewer of them, like rain easing at the edge of a storm. You're no longer waiting for sleep. You're not even trying. Minute 30. You nod once, slowly, to the onion. It says nothing, of course. But the message is received. You rise, take the onion gently in both hands, and set it by your bed. Not as a cure. Not as a guard. Just as company. You lie down, eyes soft, limbs warm. No fanfare. No compress. No ritual. Just the residual quiet earned by giving your attention to something outside yourself. You sleep, and the onion sleeps beside you. You wake before the sun. The room is filled with that gentle pre-dawn hush, the kind of silence that feels like it's been carefully placed there just for you. The onion from last night's vigil still rests on its saucer near the window, catching a faint line of bluish morning light. It looks oddly regal, like it knows you've made it to the final night. Tonight, you've chosen something soft to end with. Something subtle. The forgotten onion quilt. You first read about it in a footnote, literally, of an 1887 domestic manual, where the author casually mentions that some old folks still stuff their coverlets with crushed onion skin, claiming it makes the bed hold sleep better. You blinked at the sentence for a good 30 seconds. And now, weeks later, you're doing it. You've stitched together a small throw using an old duvet cover and dozens of dry, crinkling onion skins collected over these long nights. Each one a paper-thin flake of effort, stubbornness, and hope. The quilt rustles gently as you pull it over yourself. It's light, and smells faintly of baked earth and parchment. It doesn't warm like wool or down. But it holds something. A kind of strange weight, not in grams or ounces, but in history. The Victorians believed that onion skins retained the mood of the vegetable, even after death. That each curl of peel could act as a sort of psychic absorber, catching the vibrations of the sleeper and muting them, like hanging thick curtains over a noisy window. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, misinterpretation, or just another case of desperate minds finding comfort in the tangible. But you don't need it to be true. You only need it to feel like it could be. As the quilt settles over you, your body exhales a little more deeply than usual. Not because the skins are magical, but because the act of making them into something quiet and useful has reminded you that even absurd rituals can hold grace. You run your fingers along the seams. You think about all the things people do to chase sleep, count sheep, chant affirmations, listen to whale sounds. And here you are, smothered gently by soup scraps. And yet somehow, it works. No sharp scent tonight. No tingling oils. No candlelit experiments. Just you, a rustling quilt, and a mind that feels soothed by the strangeness of it all. And maybe that's the secret the Victorians never wrote down. That sleep isn't coaxed by science or superstition, but by surrender. That you rest best when you stop trying to win at it. So you lie back. Let the quilt puff slightly as your breath rises beneath it. You close your eyes. Let the long tale of all these strange, sleepy nights unfurl behind you like a story that ends not with a climax, but with a quiet, satisfied sigh. Your thoughts slow. Your body loosens. And somewhere, in the silent crackle of onion skin, the last of your wakefulness crumbles away, the breath slows. The limbs grow heavier. The room seems to soften at the edges, like parchment curling at the corners. You've wandered deep tonight, through tonics and charms, compresses and caps, shoes lined with vegetables and midnight vigils beside silent produce. And now, the journey ends not with a cure, but with a kind of quiet understanding, that sleep was never a prize to be captured, but a companion waiting patiently for you to stop looking so hard. Let the air hum gently in your ears. Let the covers rise and fall with the rhythm of your breathing. Let your feet remember the onion shoes, your scalp recall the warmth of that silly cap, your lips taste a fading hint of tonic that never needed to work, it just needed to be. The Victorians weren't right about everything. But they understood this, that the body wants rest, and sometimes it only needs permission. Whether from a root vegetable or a whispered ritual, it's the act of trying that soothes us. So, you can let go now. You've tried. You've played along. You've laughed and maybe even believed a little. And now it's time to let your thoughts dissolve like smoke. Let them drift beyond the edge of the bed. Let them fall away, light as onion skin in a gentle breeze. Nothing is waiting for you in the dark except peace. And peace, at last, is enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.